After the evacuation at Dunkirk in June 1940, Britain had abandoned nearly 2,500 artillery pieces, 85,000 vehicles, including 445 tanks, 11,000 machine guns, and tens of thousands of small arms on the beaches of France. What remained in Britain was enough to properly equip roughly 15,000 men. The Home Guard, formed to defend against the expected German invasion, had reached 1.5 million men by July 1940, and many of them drilled with broomsticks because there were not enough rifles. British soldiers who had fought in Norway and France had already discovered that their bolt-action Lee-Enfield rifles were being outmatched in close-range engagements by German troops carrying MP-38 and MP-40 submachine guns, weapons capable of firing 500 rounds per minute. Britain had no equivalent weapon in mass production. The military purchased every Thompson submachine gun it could get from the United States, but the Thompson cost $200 per unit in 1939, roughly $2,300 adjusted for inflation. After America entered the war in December 1941, the supply dried up almost entirely as U.S. forces needed every Thompson for themselves. The solution came from two men working at government arms facilities. Major Reginald Vernon Shepard was an inspector of armaments at the Royal Arsenal in Woolwich. Harold John Turpin was a senior draftsman at the Royal Small Arms Factory in Enfield. In December 1940, Turpin sat down at his dining table one evening and sketched a trigger mechanism with only two moving parts. The original drawing still exists. From that sketch, he hand-built the first prototype at the Philco Radio Works in Perivale, Middlesex, a civilian radio plant with no history of weapons manufacturing. It took him 36 days. The prototype was demonstrated at Enfield Lock on the 10th of January 1941. Within 39 days of the initial drawing, two working prototypes had been completed, and on the 7th of March, the weapon was officially adopted as the Carbine Sten Mark I. The name was an acronym: S for Shepard, T for Turpin, E, N for Enfield. The Sten was a blowback-operated, open-bolt submachine gun, chambered in 9mm parabellum, a caliber chosen deliberately so that British troops could fire captured German ammunition. The magazine was a direct copy of the German MP-38 design, with the idea that German magazines could be used in a pinch. The Mark II variant, which became the standard, weighed 7 pounds empty and consisted of 47 stamped metal parts, with no wood anywhere on the weapon. It fired at roughly 500 rounds per minute, with an effective range of about 100 meters. It cost as little as 2 pounds to produce, roughly $10 at wartime exchange rates, or about $130 adjusted for inflation. A Thompson cost 20 times that. A single Sten could be built in 5 man-hours by a semi-skilled laborer in a workshop that had never produced a firearm. Stables, lofts, henhouses, and garrets of private homes all became improvised Sten factories. Hundreds of small industrial operations across the United Kingdom produced sub-assemblies that were then assembled at Enfield. An engineer named Harold Hackett developed a tube drawing process for barrel production that turned out one barrel every 10 seconds and saved 1.4 million feet of metal tubing over the course of the war. Sir Claude Gibb, who oversaw British weapons manufacturing, later said Hackett made the greatest contribution to the production of small arms during the entire war. Winston Churchill personally test-fired the Mark II at Shoeburyness, Essex, on the 13th of June, 1941. By late that year, the first Stens were reaching soldiers in the field, and the reception was poor. The weapon looked like it had been assembled from plumbing supplies. Compared to the polished walnut and machined steel of the Lee-Enfield, The Sten was an insult to anyone accustomed to quality British engineering. Soldiers called it the Woolworth Special, the Plumber's Delight, the Plumber's Abortion, the Stench Gun. A common phrase was that it was made by Marks & Spencer out of Woolworth. The complaints extended beyond appearance. Early Stens had genuine reliability problems, most of which traced back to the magazine. The thin, stamped metal lips that fed cartridges into the weapon bent easily, causing misfeeds, and the open bolt design meant the weapon could discharge when bumped, dropped, or jostled. There are reports of soldiers deliberately throwing locked and loaded Stens through windows to clear rooms, relying on the impact to set the weapon firing before another soldier kicked in the door. Soldiers who understood the weapon's quirks, loading only 28 rounds instead of the full 32, and avoiding using the magazine as a hand grip, found it far more dependable than its reputation suggested. Alan Lee, a member of the Parachute Regiment, said in an oral history recorded by the National Army Museum in London that when you went into a village or a house, the Sten was a reliable weapon for anything within 100 yards. The weapon's most notorious moment came on the 27th of May, 1942, in Prague. Two Czechoslovak resistance operatives, trained by the British Special Operations Executive, had been sent to assassinate Reinhard Heydrich, the head of the Reich Main Security Office and acting ruler of occupied Bohemia and Moravia. The operation was codenamed Anthropoid. Josef Gabčík and Jan Kubis positioned themselves at a hairpin bend in the Lieben district, where Heydrich's open-topped Mercedes would be forced to slow down. When the car rounded the bend, Gabčík stepped into the road, raised his Sten, and pulled the trigger. The gun jammed. Heydrich, rather than ordering his driver to accelerate out of the kill zone, told him to stop and drew his Luger. His partner Kubis threw a modified anti-tank grenade that detonated against the car's rear wheel, spraying Heydrich with shrapnel and fragments of car upholstery. Heydrich died 8 days later. It was the only successful government-organized assassination of a top-ranking Nazi during the war. Gabčík and Kubis were cornered in the crypt of St. Cyril and Methodius Cathedral in Prague, besieged by 750 SS troops. They killed 14 and wounded 21 before taking their own lives. The Nazis murdered approximately 5,000 Czech civilians in reprisal, including the destruction of the villages of Lidice and Ležáky. By late 1942, Sten production had matured, and the reliability problems of the early guns had been substantially reduced. The Special Operations Executive was now airdropping Stens by the thousands into occupied Europe, and occupied civilians did something with them that no other weapon of the war made possible at this scale. They manufactured their own. In Denmark, the resistance group BOPA produced approximately 200 in a bicycle repair shop on Gammel Køge Landevej, south of Copenhagen. Holger Danske built about 150 in workshops across the city. In Poland, at least 23 underground workshops produced copies, along with locally designed variants. French and Norwegian resistance groups did the same. A submachine gun simple enough for a bicycle mechanic in an occupied country to manufacture in secret from materials available under Nazi occupation and use against the occupiers. By the end of the war, between 4 and 4.5 million Stens had been produced across all variants, making it the second most produced submachine gun of the conflict after the Soviet PPSH-41. The Mark II alone accounted for over 2 million units. Canada's Small Arms Limited plant in Toronto manufactured 104,553 Mk2s, along with 1.1 million magazines. The weapon served in every theater and armed regular forces, partisans, resistance fighters, and special operations teams across Europe, North Africa, and Asia. In the final months of the war, the Germans themselves began manufacturing a slightly modified copy designated the MP 3008 for issue to the Volkssturm militia. Some German forgeries were so precise they included fake Enfield inspection stamps. The Sten was replaced in British service by the Sterling submachine gun, starting in 1953. But the weapon continued to appear in conflicts for decades. It saw action in the Korean War, the Malayan Emergency, and the Mau Mau Uprising. American Special Forces used suppressed versions in Vietnam. Sten guns were captured in al-Qaeda weapons caches in Iraq as late as 2010. A Canadian soldier named Gunner S.N. Teed, serving on the Western Front during the war, wrote a poem that summed up the weapon better than any technical manual. "You wicked piece of vicious tin. Call you a gun? Don't make me grin. You're just a bloated piece of pipe. You couldn't hit a hunk of tripe. But when you're with me in the night, I'll tell you, pal, you're just all right. 2 pounds, 47 parts, 5 hours of labor, built in hen houses and bicycle shops and radio factories by people who had never touched a firearm, hated by the soldiers who carried it, feared by the enemies who faced it, copied by the military that tried to destroy it. Between 4 and 4.5 million produced in under 5 years for a nation that could barely equip 2 divisions when the design was first sketched on a dining table. If you want to see the revolver that armed British officers for 76 years, that video is up there. Subscribe if you are new. We cover the stories from British military history that did not make it into the textbooks.
See you next time.